What are we doing back here? Huh? Ah, this is team. Maybe these are in the game anyways. I don't actually know. There are some achievements. And my initial playthrough, I got all but 7 of them. Kind of bothers me. I decided I was going to go ahead and go for all the others. Problem is, Steve only told me about 3 of those achievements. And as you can see, I already did one of them, which will probably some separate video, which would get through the game in a. I think it's honestly a pretty generous one. It was my first real attempt at that. Well, my first attempt at all. And I messed up quite a few times, but see, I still had like 20 minutes. So that's nice. Now, as for the other 4, which Steam doesn't anything about, they're hidden and you have to figure it out yourself. I didn't want to like play through the entire game again and just wander around like I can. I went ahead and asked a friend to tell me which chapters. So hopefully we can figure this out. I'll probably be cutting a lot out of this. I'm still going to be wandering around. I didn't ask my friend specifically what the criteria for unlocking it is, just where it is, because I like to try and figure this stuff out myself. We'll see if I end up giving up or not. For now, let's just gather what I can. So, apparently, first one I missed in chapter 2. Oh, let's go ahead and see. And figure that out. Okay, next one's in the sewers. Gross. Hello, Scope? I hope that doesn't. I can't really help it if they kill themselves. Now I have to wait for him to open the door. Gosh. I sincerely hope those Zergs killing themselves doesn't count against me. Mm-hmm. 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 Move those little legs. Oh my goodness. Okay. What? Doing this side. This side first. You get just used to it. Okay. Oh, okay. Them killing themselves doesn't count. Thank goodness. Yeah, I went ahead and looked that one up myself just so I would know if I was going for the right thing. I actually pretty much did it. First run through this chapter I did. It's just I thought it was more specifically not using the light. So I thought it would trigger like right before the chase scene and not after the chase scene. So I ended up restarting to try some other things instead. So that kind of sucks. Not a particularly difficult achievement to get to actually do once you know what to do. But I can't imagine getting that one on accident, especially if you're not specifically focusing on the trying to figure out what the achievement was or anything. Because, they give you the black light. Why wouldn't you use it? Oh well. I think the part that just peeves me off the most is just how dang slow the boat ride is. It takes like 5 minutes just waiting on Momo to do his Momo things, like every time you restart the chapter. Ugh. Okay, but time to figure out what last two achievements are before the two that I know. Okay. Alright. The next achievement is supposedly in Midtown. I have no idea what this one could be. I cannot think of what it could be. Lay down in this one. I don't remember if I ever lay down in this one. I can outlast you song? Maybe. Well, it gave me time to finish my dessert. I think his newspaper's upside down.
There's no achievement for the pool people.
Did you just look it up?
Yeah. And on Reddit, everyone else is like, man, kind of disappointed there wasn't an achievement for the pool table. Missed opportunity, scratch.
Yeah, it is a little weird. This is interesting. D12 closed the curtain and trying on some new clothes. How does this work? Get him. Can I turn off this thing? Just having the aneurysm over this.
You had one achievement that's like, don't kill any of those little guys.
Yeah.
Are there any challenge-like things that could happen in either of those two chapters?
I guess.
Oh, that's a button.
I guess if you did a like don't get seen at all in the factory by the little sentinel things. But that's about all I can think of.
Hmm,
But
that's just an interesting idea, maybe.
is that what it is?
You want me to tell you?
Well, if that's what it is, then yes.
Yeah,
Because that type of challenge I don't like to go into and try to do it only to find out that it wasn't a challenge.
like trying to finish the pool game.
Yeah. Well, that's like, I wouldn't have finished the pool game. For that, I would have assumed that the most they'd make you do is break using the cue ball. But I wouldn't think that they would make you actually play the game of pool when you can barely control where the ball goes. And also, you can knock around all the other balls too, so it'd be borderline impossible.
Hey, I played that in Goose Game. Is this actually just extended Goose Game?
Kind of.
But you're a cat.
Kind of. Yeah. Maybe that's why people like it so much. I mean, it's fun, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, like, oh, I don't understand why people like this game. I do.
Yeah, this is actually just untitled Goose Game.
No, get in the box. Gosh darn it. I got caught once that way too. It's so frustrating. When the cat is like, oh, I'm gonna jump on these boxes. And I'm like, no, I want you to jump in the box. That's the issue you have when the only real control you have is press button.
Yeah, the cat's movements are for the most part like natural feeling for a cat. But like on the other side, it still feels kind of like limited and like sometimes there are weird movements that the cat makes.
Yeah.
Apparently those lasers are they don't detect barrels.
Quit it.
The pressure.
Uh-huh.
That's a classic pressure.
Yes.
I played Zelda, I'm not. Is that it?
That's it for the factory, but it's not it for the chapter, I guess. There's still more of those things later, so maybe it includes all of
The
them.
achievement is to do it through Midtown.
Yeah, so it's also including this part here, which kind of sucks. It took me forever to find this spot. I kept on dying trying to do things that were much more dumb.
Well, you didn't know they were dumb at the time.
But yeah, I know. This will not move at all. No, I'm gonna wait until it's on the other side. There we go.
Hey.
Sneakity. Okay, and if the next one's in the nightclub, that means let's keep going.
Time to go clubbing.
I'm gonna go
By
clubbing.
clubbing, I mean beating your head in with a club.
Here's that joke. This game's a lot of fun to play fast, by the way.
A lot of fun to play slow.
Yes. Oops, I didn't mean to go down there. No! I don't know what the achievement is, but it's probably not down here. I want to pick up that record again. Ah, here it is. Look at this. I love this. It looks so silly. Yes. This song. Oh my gosh.
That was it. Give it slow.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I had a feeling it had something to do with this. I just never pressed the triangle prompt last time because I thought it would just pick up the disc again. I was like, well, I guess I'll try messing around with it more this
That's
time.
what you get for not pressing all the buttons, huh?
Okay, so I am going to start with chapter 1 and see if I can't find a scratch point. Gotta try and scratch once everywhere. I don't think I ever scratched in this chapter, so. Okay, so you're finding out that apparently you have to hit a checkpoint or something for the scratching to count. I went ahead and looked at all the previous recordings so that I could see which chapters I didn't scratch in during my initial playthrough. And compile the list of that so I can just go straight to it and get it done. So here we go, doing the scratches. A lot of this is just going to be cut out. I'm just going to cut straight to the. Yeah. Okay, here's the first one. Looky there. Nice. Okay. Now we go until we hit a checkpoint. And hopefully it will count this time. The next chapter is chapter 2, which I missed because I was holding a bucket. The prompt doesn't show up and you're holding a bucket. And here's the scratch. Dead end. I think I just never saw the prompt On this one, I literally jumped over it at one point. And here's the scratch on this one. And that's it. Thank goodness. I don't think I actually scratched the car in the prison. Or sorry, I don't think I scratched the tree in prison. I wasn't sure if batting at the keys in the car would count or not. But fortunately, it looks like it did. That chapter's kind of long to get through, so I was hoping it wouldn't be necessary. 'Cause I already had to try and play through it yesterday for this with Achievement and Cat because I didn't hit checkpoints after all the scratches I got, so... But we're good on that, which means there's only one more achievement I need to get. Okay, this achievement is quite simple, really. But it's no surprise I did not naturally unlock it over the course of the game. And it is simply just and kick back and relax. Usually you just sleep for an hour. That last one of the ones it tells you, alright, it's not one of the hidden achievements. That and territory were both not hidden, so I didn't know about them. Yeah, I don't know if it's 1 hour in one sleep or if it's 1 hour cumulatively, but either way, I'm not gonna make you sit through all of that, so just lay down and chill for a little while, I guess. Okay, well, while we're sitting here waiting, or at least I am, I figured I may as well maybe go a little bit more in depth about my thoughts on the game. I didn't talk much about it during the credits. Not much in specific, anyways. Overall, my opinion of this game is very positive. I think it's a lot of fun. Playing around as a cat is just really fun. In a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of Untitled Goose Game, I guess, where the whole objective of that game is just to cause chaos, basically. And that's not necessarily the objective of this game, but it's definitely something you kind of do along the way. It was nice how they kind of managed to capture that, I guess, because sometimes when you play as an animal in a game, it doesn't necessarily feel like you're playing as an anime. It's an anime as an animal. But this game is just so aggressively cat, I guess, in terms of what you can do in your movement, that it's kind of hard to forget, I guess. I do think, however, though, that having such an emphasis on the story, I guess, it's fine. I still think this game has a story that's very serviceable for a game, but I also feel like overall it's kind of basic and not really anything all that special. I think it's definitely one that kind of plays to tug at your heartstrings at the very beginning when the cat's falling down and stuff like that, but for the most part, none of it feels that fleshed out, I guess. So, like, and that might just be the presentation of most of it, because, like, the actual cutscenes where stuff is actually happening, those can really, like, get you, I guess. They're a lot more poignant than the rest of the game. Like, For instance, like at the very end, after B12 dies, basically, and it's just the image of the cat curling up around the little guy as the city is just opening behind it. Like, that's a pretty powerful shot. But most of the rest of the game isn't like that. The rest of the game is mostly just text speeches that B12 gives you. Or just of reminiscing about the past, basically, or remembering the past, basically, and not a lot of actual substance, I guess. It's interesting, I guess, like interesting enough to keep you going and not be like completely bored, but on the other hand, it's also not, it's not setting any records, I guess. And I don't know, it just makes certain scenes like where B12 remembers that he was human once. It just kind of doesn't really land, I guess, because it's just some text bubbles where he's like, oh, I was human, I'm gonna need a minute, and that's it. There wasn't really any fancy cutscenes or anything, and you don't necessarily need those, but I don't know, the writing just doesn't feel fleshed out in those moments, I guess. At least not as much as it could have been. And I'm not saying like I don't think it's something that could have been fixed by just having a longer game where you get to know everyone better. Because I've seen plenty of shorter media that can flesh out their characters or at least make the story more poignant in a shorter time. But again, it's not necessarily bad, it's just kind of basic, I guess. But I was never like actively bored during the initial playthrough at all either, so it works well enough. It's just not gonna set any records, I guess. But the actual presentation of the entire game is pretty incredible in terms of the actual detail and design of the world, I guess. It does all end up being pretty similar to each other. Like, ultimately, the setting of this game is an old boxed up city that's falling apart. So everywhere you go, that's exactly what you get, with maybe the exception of the sewers, because that's like the Zerk nest, basically. So it actually looks and feels pretty different. And then the contrast with the control room, which is still being actively cleaned by robots that haven't gained sentience, so to speak, yet. Or maybe never at this point. The contrast to that squeaky, clean, barren place with the rustic, rundown city was pretty big, to say the least. But that comes at the very end of the game, and for the most part, the rest of the game is pretty similar. But it is very detailed. A lot of the areas feel pretty organic. It just looks fantastic, of course. Of course, all that detail also means that sometimes when assets are repeating, it kind of stands out a little more in this game than it might in another game. But that's like a really minor thing. For the most part, it just looks great. So it's pretty fun. Honestly, I have a few other really minor complaints, like the system of movement where you just sort of point the direction you want to go and press or hold X. Might work well most of the time, but it does end up in some confusing things. Like if you're holding X and you're trying to climb up an area where you have to like turn around and jump to a platform behind you or something, sometimes the cat's like, oh, I'm going to jump down, or I'm going to jump up, and you might want to go the other direction. In addition to that, I think the game devs were smart and realized that since you don't have
you don't really have exact control over where you're actually going when you're jumping. They don't really put jumps in chase sequences or anything like that. In those instances, if you do jump, it's usually only like one jump straight forward. You're not trying to platform up something while you're being chased or anything like that. So it doesn't get in the way at times where it really matters. But on the rare instances where it does, like back during the factory exam, for example, sometimes you end up jumping on top of a box or something, on top of a crate, when you're trying to jump into a box that's next to it to hide. Which, when you're trying to stealth, is kind of important to end up in the hidey box and not on top of a box for all the world to see, but situations like that really don't come up too often. But it is still a problem, even if it is a minor one. And of course, my other complaint, which only really happens if you're going achievement hunting or anything like that, is just the fact that you can only select the chapter and you can't select specific parts of the chapter if you're trying to go back and replay a section. So if you miss an achievement that's pretty far into a chapter, you will have to replay the whole thing again, and you can't skip any of the cutscenes or anything either, so it just adds up to be quite a few minutes of extra time you shouldn't necessarily have to spend in order to reach those achievements. Or like if you miss something more substantial, like a badge or something, because some of the one or memory, some of those can get pretty hidden. I was fortunate enough not to really miss any except for the sewers one, which is kind of the worst chapter in my opinion to miss something. Not because I found it particularly difficult to get through. In fact, the hardest chapters to rush through are probably the more stealth-oriented ones with the sentries, being Midtown or Jail. But I think the thing that's even more aggravating about that chapter over those other two is that the boat ride at the beginning of the chapter is just so long. The whole segment where you're still with Momo, you're spending most of that time just waiting on Momo, either waiting for the boat to get to its destination or waiting for Momo to get to his destination. And if you have to replay that chapter a lot for any reason, it just adds up real fast. This is probably at least 5 minutes of just waiting on Momo to some capacity before you can just get to pure, uninterrupted, pretty much gameplay for the rest of the chapter. And most of the stuff you need to get in that chapter are pretty late in. They're not before the boat, they're after the boat. So that can get pretty aggravating over time. But again, it only really comes up if you're trying to 100% this. Yeah, also in this day and age, you should just be able to skip cutscenes in general. I don't think there's a lot of segments in this game that technically count as cutscenes, but it should still be an option. But yeah, that's probably most of my gripes, honestly, with this game. I'd still heartily recommend it. It's a lot of fun. It really is. Oh, and one more thing I did want to talk about that I did like about, I guess, the setting more than anything. It's kind of lore related, kind of story related, but a lot of times in post-apocalyptic game type settings, especially, um, the image of humanity is usually overall very cynical. Um, it's usually some element of everybody's being incredibly selfish, and even in big long games, like I think about games like maybe Fallout 4. I haven't seen the other Fallout, so I don't know about the other ones, but Fallout 4 or Bioshock games, in all those games, you'll travel through this world and you'll find a lot of lore and such, but all of it kind of boils down to the same thing where it's like, oh, someone or a group of people is being incredibly selfish and basically left other people to die. Or worse in some instances. And extremely rarely, if ever, will you find someone just being a decent person, like at all. And it's usually just, oh, look at this. It turns out everybody destroyed themselves and like did these evil things, and now there's no chivalry in the world. Everything good is just dead. And my problem with that is, like, yeah, maybe there's some instance of, especially in longer games, that sort of take can get pretty oppressive. It can get pretty depressing. But for me, especially, it just gets pretty boring. It gets boring because it just feels like you're hearing the same story over and over again about how humans suck, basically. And you rarely, if ever, hear anything different. And like, yeah, this game still has some of that underlying, but the reason it doesn't weigh on me at this time is not just the fact that the game itself is pretty short, but the fact is that it's not always that hard on humans. Like, yes, ultimately, when they're in the city, they're they ended up having some pretty harsh class systems, and some people did still end up letting others kind of fend for themselves and essentially die out. But this game kind of metered that by also saying things like, oh, it's not acceptable, of course, this isn't an excuse, but they were trapped in this city for probably a long time, never being able to go outside and just being stuck. And I think it's pretty natural that could very easily bring out the worst in someone. That, like, yeah, I think it's these pressures of being stuck in the city and such that probably led to things like the class system being formed and the harsh regiments imposed by the sentry robot. Well, not the sentry robots, but the people who programmed them, I guess, in Midtown, and just the sucky life conditions of the slums. A lot of that probably came from that initial pressure. But in addition to that, the robots themselves, the companions, it wasn't like some generic story, I guess, where usually when you have robots in a game like this, it's like, oh, they overthrew the humans because they were being oppressed, or they became a killer AI, like a rogue AI, and just started to kill everyone off. But no, that's, or someone even uses them and like pretends it's a rogue AI, but it's actually some evil human mastermind behind it all. Like, that doesn't happen in this game. What happens in this game is that the implication that the companions actually just missed the humans, and because of that, they sort of tried to mimic, and they do mimic human behavior and everything. In a lot of ways, they're keeping the humans alive, and it's viewed as a very positive thing. It's not like, oh no, they're falling into the same destructive habits now. It was the ones that didn't evolve that were causing the problems, the sentries and stuff. The ones that never overcame their programming were the ones that caused the problems. But the robots that were able to basically learn, grow, and develop, and basically gain sentience. They're actually like just trying to survive and, in a way, keep human memory alive. And for the most part, they're not all that evil, I guess. They're just trying to live and wanting to be better and to live in better circumstances and such. So, like, yeah, it's just nice because it's not negative, just completely negative. This game has a pretty good balance of, yeah, talking about those negative aspects, but then also looking on the bright side, basically, in a lot of ways, which helps keep it from feeling too depressing or oppressive or anything like that, or even just boring, because it's not just the same old thing. When you find lore, it isn't just about how humans killed themselves or anything like that, or backstabbed each other. It's a mixture of, there's a little bit of that, but there's also a lot of whimsy about the past, I guess. And just a lot of melancholy, I guess, still. But it's almost more in a bittersweet way, where it's like humans may be gone now and we may miss them and different things that came with them, like being able to feel, being able to taste, stuff like that. But to an extent, other living things and the robots themselves, the companions themselves, are just hoping to keep that alive anyway. So good elements are trying to be brought forward still. I just thought that was pretty nice. But honestly, I've just been rambling for a while now, and there's not much more to say, I think. At least, not that I can think of right now. This isn't like scripted or anything. I've thought about it, but I didn't write anything down. But probably just sick of listening to this, so just shut up for a while and wait for the achievement. So I'll see y'all then. Just been watching these two tossing buckets for ages. Sometimes one kind of like briefly shows up where and when it's not supposed to. Oh, I guess
The one time you blinked.
How dare I go to the bathroom? So annoying. Okay, well, that achievement was got at some point. Guess I missed it, but that's it. Like everything in the game.